Good afternoon or good evening, wherever you are. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Tunde Fafunwa. I'm the lead advisor for the Digital Center at the Economic Commission for Africa in Addis Ababa. It's my pleasure to be here and to talk on the topic of justice for all in a digital age. I've been asked to speak about the digital transformation strategy for Africa and the role of the legal profession and the judiciary. The digital transformation strategy for Africa is an African Union endorsed document that was adopted at the 2020 February African Union Summit earlier this year. And the digital transformation strategy covers the pillars for digital transformation for the continent, as well as some cross-cutting themes. Some of those key elements or pillars for digital transformation that the document covers includes familiar areas such as broadband, digital skills, enabling environments, platforms, and of course, the important need for infrastructure. But it also covers some cross-cutting themes such as digital identification that I'll talk a little bit about today. The purpose of the strategic document, which was developed with wide consultation with international organizations, with African Union member states, with the private sector, with civil society, was to set a platform or base for member states to use to implement national digital strategies and to create a harmonizing mechanism and framework for member states to utilize and to follow for digital transformation. As we know, technology and digital services affect every part of our lives, whether it is our work, our play, our social, political, and even entertainment, of course, parts of our lives. So we're going to see increasing digitalization over the next few years. That, of course, is accelerated because of COVID. By some estimates, there has been an acceleration of online and digital use, and use of digital tools has been accelerated several years just in the last few months because of the need to adopt digital technologies. Of course, primary among that is broadband and internet, but of course it covers almost every aspect of our lives, whether that is entertainment, whether that's education, and now remote and online learning, and of course, financial services. So the role of digitalization is going to play an increasingly important part of our lives as Africans. And there are both huge opportunities as well as challenges because of that. And I'd like to address a few of those today. Three areas in particular I'm going to talk through. The first is digital technologies as a human right. For many aspects now, the right to internet or online is seen as a basic right and a necessity in today's world, in today's digital world. So digital access and online access, internet access could be seen as a right. More specifically, the United Nations has adopted a legal identity mandate or framework that says that identification is a right. And in today's world, identification is almost certainly based on some form of digital identification. In that regard, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and other organizations have adopted a good digital ID framework that I will address a little later. So human rights and digital access to digital services, digital identification and digital ID can be seen as a human rights issue. I'd also suggest that it is an economic issue. In today's world, We see very high levels of inequality. We see a huge digital divide. And in order to meet across this divide, economics and economic equity, inclusive growth becomes a priority or a mandate. Part of that economic growth has got to address the gender issue and ensure that the digital divide is crossed from all perspectives. That kind of economic inclusion requires adoption of digital technologies, such as broadband and access to broadband. It also includes access to skills and the ability to gain the necessary skills. It requires a legal and regulatory framework. And I would also suggest it requires the need for identification. For identification in particular, it's estimated that perhaps almost 500 million Africans do not have a foundational ID, an official ID that they can use to get other IDs or to use to get a broad range of public and private services. Probably for everybody in this conference or listening to this talk has, I'd suggest, maybe more than 10 IDs if you start counting passports and driver's licenses and national identification cards, health insurance cards and credit cards and employee cards and company identification. And the list goes on and on. But for hundreds of millions of Africans, they will have no official way to identify themselves. This, of course, is a human rights issue. It's also an economic issue. It means that people don't have access, for example, to financial services or payments, certainly not able to open a bank account. They're not able to participate in the formal economy, obtain a SIM card in most countries, and to gain access to public services. So digital ID is going to be one of the underpinnings of the digital transformation strategy for Africa and across Africa, along with some of the other key areas I mentioned, such as broadband and, of course, digital skills. So this then brings us to the third item or element that I'd like to talk about, which is the challenges of digital infrastructure, the challenges of digital ID, and ensuring that these are implemented in a way that is universal, that is inclusive, and that is equitable. And I think this, of course, is where the judiciary and the legal profession has an enormous role to play. Taking just one key area, digital identification, there is an enormous opportunity for misuse, lack of transparency, lack of security, lack of inclusion or discrimination in the implementation and policies of IDs. And the Good Digital ID Principles addresses all of these by identifying what are the good principles for digital ID. So one of these would be inclusion, would be universal access, would be ensuring that there are no barriers to usage, that it is indeed an enabler for identification and for services and is not restricted in any way. The second broad area for digital identification and good digital ID would include the institutional arrangements around privacy, around data protection, around e-transactions, so that there are clear legal laws and regulations ensuring data privacy, ensuring data protection, ensuring the legalization of electronic transactions, and more importantly, also ensuring that the institutions necessary to carry these out and the governance required for these is also in place. So these are some of the key areas that the legal profession and judiciary have both an opportunity and I might suggest an obligation to ensure that as these regulations and rules for digital ID, for data, for inclusion are developed, that there's full participation across the board by the public and private sector, by the legal profession, by civil society organizations who are very close to the communities who in many cases are most affected by these, and to make sure that the policies and the regulations that are put in place are fair and equitable, that they are sensitive to the local and national issues, that they are inclusive from a gender perspective, and that the institutions that are responsible for guiding and implementing these rules and regulations are independent. So I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak briefly on this topic. And I am very excited as part of the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa and the Digital Center on the deliberations that are occurring this week. Look forward to exciting outcomes from these sessions and very good input to us and other organizations in terms of ensuring justice for all in the digital age. Thank you very much.